The sensor log didn't make sense. Archivian fleet treater Soveth reviewed it 3 times, pressing 4 of her sensory filaments against the display membrane as if touch might clarify what sight could not. The reading was 14 months old, pulled from a decommissioned Terran observation buoy the salvage team had hauled aboard an hour ago. The buoy itself was unremarkable, a battered cylinder of human manufacture, scorched along one hemisphere, its transmission array folded like a broken limb. But the interior log showed a gravitational reading that should not exist. Not a spike, not an anomaly. A sustained, deliberate, asterisk-shaped asterisk gravitational signature, lasting 11 minutes and 43 seconds, originating from a point in open space where no stellar body existed, no dark matter filament had been charted, nothing that physics could use as justification. Soveth flagged the entry and said nothing to the salvage crew. She had learned, in 14 years of reading human artifacts, that the things they left behind were never as simple as they looked. The Council of Aligned Civilizations had passed Resolution 7 Omega on a Tuesday, which was a human measurement of time that most species found arbitrary, but which humans themselves treated with a peculiar solemnity that the Council had long since stopped trying to understand. The resolution was 4 sentences long. It had taken 11 years to write. No member civilization, affiliate state, or autonomous colony shall develop, test, deploy, or theoretically advance any technology capable of artificially manipulating gravitational fields for military application. Violations will result in immediate suspension of trade agreements, diplomatic recognition, and navigational access to Council-controlled transit corridors. The prohibition extends to theoretical research, simulation modeling, and archival documentation of previous experiments. This resolution is binding, retroactive, and non-negotiable. The humans had voted in favor of it. That was the part Soveth kept returning to, now, 14 months later, holding a sensor log that described something the resolution had declared impossible. The humans had voted yes. And then, apparently, space itself had disagreed. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Yara Vasquez, and she was the reason the buoy existed. She had placed it herself, 18 months before the Council vote, as part of a classified observation program the Terran Defense Cooperative called Project Meridian. She had been 29 years old at the time, 2 years out of the Advanced Gravitational Systems program at Callisto Station, and she had believed with the clean certainty of the recently educated that what she was doing was going to change everything. She had been right about that part. She had been wrong about almost everything else. The buoy was meant to observe the test site, a region of open space 3 light minutes from the heliopause, far enough from the inner system that any gravitational distortion would dissipate before it became a navigational hazard. The test itself was small as these things were measured, not a weapon, not yet. A proof of concept, a device the size of a refrigerator, carrying a focused gravitational lens array that could, in theory, compress spacetime across a controlled radius, hold that compression for a sustained duration, and release it in a directed vector. In practice, what it could do was reshape the space around a target until the target stopped being a coherent object. "This is going to fail," said Dr. Andal Akafer, standing beside her at the observation console aboard the TDS Amaranth Asterisk, watching the countdown. He said it the way someone says a thing they hope is wrong. "Probably," Yara agreed. "The containment field can't hold sustained compression above 0.4 terahertz. We've run the simulation 9 times. It destabilizes at minute 7. 8 times out of 9. Andal looked at her. "That's not a reassuring statistic." "No," she said, "it isn't." The countdown reached 0. The device activated. The sensor buoy, 300 kilometers away, began recording. For 6 minutes and 50 seconds, Everything proceeded exactly as the simulations predicted. The gravitational lens formed. The compression held. The radius was stable. Yara watched the readings with the kind of focused calm she'd trained herself to perform, because she had learned early that her face was what people looked at when they needed to decide whether to panic. At 6 minutes and 51 seconds, the containment field didn't destabilize. It adapted. Not in any way she had programmed. Not in any way the simulations had predicted. The field reorganized its own boundary geometry, shifting from a spherical compression architecture to something that had no name in existing gravitational physics, something that looked, on the display, almost like the field was asterisk learning, which shape caused it the least resistance. "What is that?" Andal said. Not a question. The voice of someone watching something that shouldn't be happening. "I don't know." "Yara." "I don't know, Andal." The device ran for 11 minutes and 43 seconds. Then it powered down cleanly, on schedule, exactly as designed. The space where it had operated looked completely normal. But the sensor buoy's log showed a gravitational signature that didn't belong to any known physical process. A signature that, to any physicist who reviewed it carefully, would raise one immediate and deeply uncomfortable question. The field hadn't just held. It had done something extra asterisk, something the device hadn't been designed to do, something that required the field to have responded to local spacetime conditions in a way that implied either a catastrophic error in their understanding of physics, or something else entirely, something that would take Yara 3 more years and the loss of 17 colleagues to begin to name. She didn't know any of that yet, standing on the amaranth asterisk, watching the readings settle. What she knew was this: the test had worked. And she had a very quiet feeling that she was going to wish it hadn't. The council vote happened 8 months later. By then, Project Meridian had run 4 more tests. Each one showed the same anomalous behavior. Each one produced a gravitational signature that extended slightly further, lasted slightly longer, and demonstrated slightly more structural complexity than the one before it, as if the technology, or something interacting with the technology, was iterating. The Terran Defense Cooperative classified all 5 results at the highest available security tier. They submitted to the council vote. They voted yes on Resolution 7 Omega. They did not mention Project Meridian. They did not mention the anomalous signatures. They did not mention what they had started to call, in private, in rooms with very few people and very good soundproofing, the asterisk echo problem. Soveth didn't know about any of this when she flagged the sensor log. She knew only that the buoy had recorded something that violated council resolution and Newtonian expectation simultaneously, and that the humans had apparently known about it and said nothing, and that the log was 14 months old, which meant whatever process had produced that signature had been running, unobserved and unreported, for over a year before the salvage team accidentally dragged the evidence aboard. She filed a formal inquiry to the council's compliance secretariat the same afternoon. The response came back in 6 hours. "Thank you for your submission. The Compliance Secretariat has reviewed the attached sensor data and determined that the gravitational signature described falls within natural variation parameters for heliopause-adjacent space. No further investigation is warranted. This inquiry is closed." Soveth read it twice. Then she looked up the natural variation parameters for heliopause-adjacent space, which she had access to because she was a fleet reader with full archival privileges, and she confirmed what she had already suspected. The signature in the buoy's log was not within those parameters. It wasn't close to those parameters. It was, by the relevant measurements, approximately 900% outside those parameters. Someone in the Compliance Secretariat had either made a catastrophic error or had been told to close the inquiry regardless of what the data showed. Soveth made a second copy of the sensor log, encrypted it to her personal archive, and began, very quietly, to look for other buoys. She found 11 more over the following 6 weeks. Not through official channels. The official channels, she had discovered, had a curious tendency to return results that contradicted what she was looking for. She found them through decommissioned salvage manifests, through transit corridor maintenance logs, through the boring administrative debris of a galactic bureaucracy that generated more paperwork than anyone could possibly read. Each buoy told the same story. The gravitational signatures were spreading. Not from a single point, not from the original test site, from everywhere humans had operated in the last 14 months, near their stations, near their shipping lanes, near the frontier systems where they'd been expanding their monitoring networks. Every location showed the same anomalous readings, the same structured, non-random, physically inexplicable gravitational pattern. The pattern that Yara Vasquez had first seen on the *Amaranth *S displays, watching a refrigerator-sized device do something it wasn't designed to do, was now present across 11 separate regions of space, spanning roughly 40 light-years of human operational territory. Soveth sat with this for a long time. Then she thought about what it meant, and the thought arrived not as an idea but as something more physical. A slow, cold tightening in her secondary circulatory system that her species had evolved as a response to proximity to large predators. The humans hadn't built a gravity weapon. They had built something that attracted something else. Or they had woken something up. And this was the thought that made her circulatory response worsen. They had always known this was coming. They had voted yes on Resolution 7 Omega specifically to stop anyone from looking too closely *. And the word weapon was not the right word at all, and had never been the right word, and the Council had spent 11 years debating the wrong question. She found Yara Vasquez through a shipping manifest. Specifically, through the manifest of a small civilian science vessel called the Pale Theorem *, registered to the Terran Research Auxiliary, and currently docked at Waystation Murasaki, 2 transit corridors from Soveth's current position. The manifest listed Vasquez as Chief Science Officer, her research focus listed as Deep Space Atmospheric Monitoring, which was the kind of deliberately dull description that Soveth had learned to treat as a flag. She booked passage to Waystation Murasaki on the next available transport. 14 hours later, she was standing in the Pale Theorem *S docking bay, looking at a woman who was leaning against a cargo container, eating something out of a foil packet, and who looked at Soveth with the specific expression of a person who had been expecting this visit for a long time and had not been looking forward to it. "Fleet Treater Soveth," Yara said, "you know who I am. I know you've been pulling salvage manifests for 6 weeks and you found 11 buoys." She crumpled the foil packet and put it in her pocket. "I know you filed an inquiry that got buried. I know you made a private copy of the original log." A pause. "I know you're scared." "I am," Soveth said. This surprised her. She hadn't planned to admit it. "The signatures are spreading." "Yes. You know why." It was not a question. Yara's expression told her everything about whether it was a question. "Come inside," Yara said. "This is going to take a while." The interior of the Pale Theorem smelled of recycled air and something organic that Soveth couldn't identify, and every surface was covered in displays showing gravitational mapping data. Not the raw sensor readings Soveth had found in the buoys, but processed, layered, annotated data that had clearly been accumulated over months or years, cross-referenced against stellar cartography and something else, something she didn't recognize. A second data stream running parallel to the gravity maps that used a notation system she'd never seen. "What is the second stream?" she asked. "Temporal density markers." Yara pulled up a chair and gestured for Soveth to take the one opposite. It took us 2 years to develop the measurement framework. The math doesn't exist yet in any published form. We had to build it. Temporal density. The degree to which a region of spacetime resists change. Yara's voice was steady and precise, the voice of someone who had explained a terrifying thing enough times that they had made peace with the terror. Think of it like viscosity, but for time instead of liquid. High-density regions are stable, events proceed predictably, causality is well-behaved. Low-density regions are, she paused. They're not unstable exactly, they're permeable asterisk. Soveth looked at the map and the gravitational signatures. They correlate perfectly with low-density regions, every single one. Yara pulled up an overlay and the correlation was immediate and undeniable. The anomalous gravitational patterns aligned with temporal density depressions the way a shadow aligns with the object casting it. We didn't create the low-density regions. They were already there. What the meridian tests did was, she stopped, started again. You know how some frequencies of light can make certain materials fluoresce? They don't create the property, they just make it visible. The tests made the low-density regions visible. No, Yara looked at her steadily. The tests made us visible to whatever is in the low-density regions. The cold tightening in Soveth's circulatory system returned, harder than before. What is in the low-density regions? We don't have a name for them yet. We've been calling them pressures asterisk, not because it's accurate, but because it's the closest analogy. They're not objects, they don't have mass or position in any conventional sense. They're more like. She reached for something on her desk, found a glass of water, and set it in front of Soveth. Then she pressed one finger against the surface of the water and held it there, not pushing down, just touching. The surface curved slightly around the contact point. Like that. They exist at the boundary between normal spacetime and something adjacent to it, and they exert influence through that boundary by responding to what happens on our side. They respond, Soveth said slowly, to gravitational manipulation. To sustained, shaped gravitational fields. Yes, the natural variation in gravitational phenomena doesn't register to them. Stars, planets, black holes, all of that is just background. It's like trying to have a conversation in a room where the white noise generator is running, but a precision-engineered gravitational lens held steady for more than 6 minutes. She lifted her finger from the water. The surface settled. That's a signal they can hear clearly. And resolution 7 omega prevents anyone else from running the kind of experiment that generates a detectable signal. Yes. Yara's voice was very even. We needed everyone to stop so we could figure out what we'd started without someone else accidentally making it worse. Soveth had spent 40 years developing what she believed was a reliable ability to read deception in multiple species. She looked at Yara Vasquez and found, to her considerable discomfort, that she could not determine whether the woman was telling the complete truth or a very carefully shaped portion of it. You said you needed to figure out what you'd started, she said carefully. Have you? Yara was quiet for 4 full seconds. Yes, she said, about 3 months ago. And I need you to understand something before I tell you, because your instinct is going to be to report this to the council. And if the council responds the way the compliance secretariat responded to your inquiry, the next 6 months go very badly for everyone in this region of space. Soveth waited. The pressures aren't hostile, Yara said. They're not friendly either, those categories don't apply. They're curious asterisk. They've been observing signals from our side of the boundary for as long as we've been generating them, which is to say for as long as any spacefaring civilization has been operating in this region. They've watched every species come through here. They've watched council shipping lanes, military movements, diplomatic convoys, all of it. And in all that time, in all that observation, they have never once responded to anything they saw. Until the meridian tests. Until we deliberately, precisely, and repeatedly shaped gravitational fields in a way that spoke directly to the mechanism they used to exert influence. Yara leaned forward. Soveth, They responded because we were the first civilization in the history of this region that did something that, from their perspective, looked like we understood they were there. Every other civilization passed through and generated background noise. We generated a signal, and the response they sent back. She pulled up a new display. The gravitational signatures that Soveth had been tracking across 11 buoy logs. Spread across 40 light-years of human operational territory, they weren't spreading randomly. Overlaid on the stellar cartography, they formed a pattern, a structure. The shape was complex and three-dimensional, and Soveth had to rotate the display 3 times before she understood what she was looking at. It was an asterisk perimeter asterisk. The pressures hadn't been invading human space. They had been asterisk marking asterisk it. "They're protecting us," Soveth said. "No," Yara's voice was quiet. "They're quarantining us. There's a difference, and the difference matters enormously, and we have approximately 4 months to figure out which one it is before the perimeter closes, and we find out the hard way." The Murasaki incident, as it came to be recorded in council archives, began 3 weeks later, when a Dravathi heavy cruiser attempted to cross the perimeter while enforcing a trade sanctions sweep through human-flagged transit corridors. The asterisk Dravathi Ascendant was a 2.4-kilometer vessel with weapons systems that had not lost a direct engagement in 60 years of operational history. Its captain, Fleet Commander Asa Trev, was the kind of officer whose confidence rested on a foundation of accumulated victories and had never been seriously tested by anything that could not be expressed in terms of firepower ratios. The asterisk Ascendant crossed the perimeter boundary at 3:40 ship time. 40 seconds later, every gravitational drive on the vessel simultaneously produced a reading that was, according to Chief Engineer Pell, technically impossible because it would require the drives to be responding to a gravitational gradient that doesn't exist in this sector. "Then why are they responding to it?" Trev asked. Pell didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice had a quality Trev had never heard from her before. "Sir, the drives aren't malfunctioning. They're being asterisk redirected. Something is using them as a reference frame and—" The asterisk Ascendant came to a full stop. Not because Trev ordered it, not because the engines failed. The vessel simply stopped moving, with the smooth and absolute authority of something that had decided stopping was the appropriate outcome and had no interest in discussing the matter. "I'll stop," Trev said unnecessarily. "Yes, sir," his helmsman agreed, in the voice of someone who needed to say something procedurally correct to avoid having a personal crisis. They held position for 11 minutes. Then the asterisk Ascendant moved again, backwards, gently, precisely, carrying it back across the perimeter boundary to the space it had come from, and then releasing it with the same unhurried finality. Trev filed his incident report 6 hours later. He described what had happened in accurate technical terms and drew no conclusions, because the conclusions that were available were ones he was not prepared to formally document. The council received his report and convened an emergency session. Soveth attended as an observer. She sat in the secondary gallery of the council chamber and watched 23 representatives of 23 civilizations attempt to apply existing frameworks of diplomacy, military doctrine, and physics to a situation that was specifically resistant to all three. It took 4 hours for someone to ask the question that Soveth had been waiting for. Where are the humans in this? The chamber went quiet, not the quiet of people who didn't know the answer. The quiet of people who had known the answer for a while and had been hopping not to have to say it out loud. The asterisk Pale theorem asterisk is positioned at the perimeter boundary, said the council's intelligence coordinator, a Yanthari delegate named S. Savo, whose voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering information they found deeply unpleasant. It has been there for 11 days. Its science team appears to be. A pause. communicating with the entities responsible for the perimeter. Communicating how? Demanded the Dravathi delegate, who had heard from Trev and was not in a charitable mood toward anything human. Through gravitational field modulation. S. Savo's voice went even flatter. Using equipment that was built after Resolution 7 Omega passed. Equipment that is, technically, in violation of the resolution's prohibition on gravitational technology development. The Dravathi delegate stood up. Then they should be removed from that position immediately and charged with. They're the only ones the entities will speak to, Sovath said. The gallery was supposed to be silent. Observers were not supposed to speak. She said it anyway, loudly enough that it landed in the chamber like something physical. 23 delegates looked at her. The *Pale Theorem *S team began attempts to establish communication 14 months ago, she said. They've been developing a translation framework since the first test showed a response. They are the only reason the perimeter is behaving the way it is, as a boundary rather than a collapse. A collapse, said the council chair very carefully. Clarify. The entity's initial response to the meridian tests was not a perimeter. It was a withdrawal sequence, a preparation to remove the temporal density scaffold that underlies stable spacetime in this region. She let that land, watched it arrive. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez's team spent 8 months convincing them not to. The perimeter is the compromise. The entities hold their position. We stop generating uncontrolled gravitational signals that they find. She searched for the right word. Alarming. They find us alarming, the Dravathi delegate said, and she couldn't tell if it was outrage or something else moving through his voice. They find *chaos alarming, Sovath said. Random, uncoordinated gravitational events produced by multiple civilizations simultaneously, with no apparent awareness of the boundary layer, no acknowledgement of the entity's presence. From their perspective, we have been conducting ourselves inside a living structure without any indication that we know it's alive. She paused. The meridian tests were the first evidence they'd received, in what may be millions of years, that anyone on our side of the boundary had noticed. Silence. Then, and Resolution 7 Omega. Prevented anyone else from generating competing signals during the negotiation period. Yes. A long moment passed over the council chamber. Sovath could see the reinterpretation moving through the room like weather, the gradual, uncomfortable recognition that the resolution they had debated for 11 years as a prohibition against weapons development had been, from the human side of the vote, something entirely different. Not a limitation, a quarantine of their own making. A controlled environment in which they could attempt the most delicate diplomatic contact in the history of spacefaring civilization, without interference. They voted yes, said a Murak delegate softly, because they needed the silence. Yes, Sovath said. They knew what they'd found. Yes. And they didn't tell us. She thought about Yara Vasquez, leaning against a cargo container, eating from a foil packet, waiting for this moment with the patience of someone who had calculated exactly when the truth would need to become visible. No, Sovath said, they didn't tell you, because if you had known, you would have sent your own vessels to investigate, run your own tests, generated your own signals, and the entities would have perceived that as exactly the kind of uncoordinated chaos that had been alarming them for millennia. She met the Dravathi delegate's eyes directly. Your cruiser crossing the perimeter 3 weeks ago nearly ended this. They held. Barely. Barely, the council chair repeated. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez spent 9 hours in direct communication re-establishing the terms of the compromise after the *ascendant* incident. Sovath paused. She didn't sleep. She negotiated for 9 consecutive hours with entities that experience time differently than any of us, using a translation framework she built from scratch, in a situation where the cost of a single critical miscommunication was the destabilization of spacetime across 40 light years. She let the chamber hold that. And then, she added. She filed a formal self-report to the Council Compliance Secretariat acknowledging the post-resolution equipment development and requested that any sanctions be processed after the negotiation concluded. The Murak delegate made a sound that Soveth associated with beings who had just had their emotional framework reorganized without their permission. Soveth was allowed into the *Pale Theorem *S main lab 2 days later, carrying a formal council observer credential that Yara had not asked for and did not seem particularly impressed by. The lab was quieter than before, and Al-Akafer was asleep on a cot in the corner, which she suspected was not a usual feature of the workspace. 3 other researchers were running monitoring cycles, moving with the focused efficiency of people operating on less rest than was medically advisable. Yara was at the primary display. The gravitational communication array, technically in violation of Resolution 7 Omega, was a piece of equipment so small and so unglamorous that Soveth had to look at it twice to identify it. It was roughly the size of a human forearm, mounted on an adjustable bracket, trailing a series of cables that connected to the ship's power systems. It looked like something someone had built in a hurry with the materials available. It probably was. How long can the compromise hold? Soveth asked. Yara didn't look away from the display. As long as we maintain consistent, coordinated communication, as long as no other vessels enter the perimeter uninvited, as long as the Council doesn't decide that the appropriate response to extra-dimensional entities is a sanctions resolution. A pause. And as long as I keep doing this. You personally. The entities have developed the translation framework in relation to my communication patterns. My specific neural engagement signature is part of how they identify the signal. She did look at Soveth then, briefly. I can't hand this off. I can train a successor, but that takes 18 months minimum, and for those 18 months there's a transition risk window where any signal disruption reads to them as chaos, as hostility. She turned back to the display. So yes, me personally, for the foreseeable future. Soveth looked at her. You understood this would happen when you ran the first test. I understood it was possible. That's not the same thing. No, Yara agreed, it isn't. Soveth thought about what it meant to be 29 years old, running an unauthorized test in open space, watching a device do something unprecedented, and understanding with the particular clarity of someone who has just crossed a threshold that there is no uncrossing it, that the test has run, the signal has been sent, the attention has been attracted, and whatever comes next is going to require someone to stay. And that someone might as well be you because you're already here, and you already understand the problem better than anyone else will for years. Were you afraid? Soveth asked. Yara considered this with what seemed like genuine attention to accuracy. I was afraid when the field adapted, she said finally. The first time. After that I was too busy to be afraid in any useful way. A small pause. Andal was afraid, he's still afraid. He stayed anyway. Soveth looked at Akafer, asleep on the cot in the corner, still wearing his work clothes. The council wants to know, she said carefully, what you want in return for what you've done. The question settled into the room and sat there. Yara was quiet for long enough that Soveth counted 11 seconds. Tell them we want the resolution repealed, she said. The prohibition on gravitational research needs to become a coordination framework instead, everyone working together, controlled signals, no unilateral experiments. Because the entities are still watching, and they're going to keep watching, and eventually some other civilization in some other region of space is going to accidentally run a test of their own, and the question of whether that goes the way ours did or, she stopped. The technology isn't the danger. Ignorance is the danger. You can't outlaw your way out of physics. The council will resist. I know. Yara's voice held no particular bitterness. They'll debate it for 11 years and then vote yes for the wrong reasons and think they've solved the problem. A moment. That's fine. We'll still be here. She meant it as a statement about the negotiation. Soveth heard it as something larger, something that applied not just to the communication framework and the gravitational array and the 11 months of work still ahead, but to a general human disposition she had been trying to name since she first flagged the sensor log and felt the cold certainty that she was looking at something she didn't understand. They would still be here. Not because they had won, not because the technology was superior or the diplomacy was successful or the entities had been friendly. Because stopping had never been a serious option. The asterisk ascendant had been moved by something with the casual authority of a god, set back across its own boundary like a chess piece returned to its starting square. And the humans had looked at that, and their immediate response had been to transmit an apology on the entity's behalf and resume the negotiation. 17 of Yara's colleagues had been lost during the early test phase, not all to accidents, some to the mental and physical cost of work that had no weekends, no definitive victories, no assurance that any of it was working, and the ones who remained had stayed. That was the thing the Council had been trying to understand for decades and kept failing to, kept explaining as aggression or ambition or some militaristic cultural artifact, when the truth was both simpler and far more difficult to model. Humans stayed not because they were unafraid, but because being afraid wasn't a sufficient reason to stop, and they had apparently made that decision somewhere in their evolutionary history and had never seen any compelling argument to reverse it. The gravitational array pulsed once, very gently. On the display, a response pattern emerged, complex, non-repeating, belonging to no known physics but perfectly legible, apparently, to the woman sitting in front of it. Yara's hands moved. She was responding. Soveth watched her work for a while. Then she left quietly, because the conversation was between parties she could not yet follow, about terms she could not yet interpret, conducted in a language that had been invented 18 months ago by a sleep-deprived human and entities that experienced time like a texture. And she understood clearly that her role in all of this was observer, not participant. The asterisk pale theorem asterisk S hull hummed with something that might have been its power systems, or might have been something else entirely, something that had no name yet in any language spoken on this side of the boundary. Something that felt, in the way that understanding sometimes arrives as a physical sensation before it becomes a thought, like the difference between a door that has been locked and a door that has been opened from the other side. Outside the viewport, the perimeter held its geometry against the dark, 40 light-years of marked space, invisible to unassisted sight, expressing itself only in the patient, structured language of gravity, which is to say in the only language the universe has never found a way to silence, which is to say in the oldest conversation there is. And at the center of it, in a small ship that smelled of recycled air, a human woman who had started all of this and couldn't stop and wouldn't stop sent another reply into the deep, and